Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larsen, back with my co-host on this mini-series, Ted Merz. If you don't know Ted, you should check out Principles Media and his LinkedIn. Recently went over the 20,000 followers mark and growing fast. Spent 32 years at Bloomberg, and we are co-hosting repeat guest friend of mine, Josh Steimle, owner of multiple businesses, including published author, written 300 articles for magazines, wrote Chief CMOs at Work, wrote 60 Days to LinkedIn, and somebody I've learned a ton from in my life. So I'm really excited to get these two together for the first time. Ted, I'm going to let you kick us off. What do you want to ask Josh?
Well, Josh has this really wide background that I'd say overall is like you're an expert in modern communications. For just introduce it, you're an expert in writing on LinkedIn, and you have a company that teaches people how to do that properly. You have a company that teaches people how to do book writing. And so I'm interested in hearing kind of, to start out with, what's your take on executive communications right now? Like, what's the state of the art? Like, what are people doing that's the most effective? What's working? Kind of what's new? If people were coming to you cold, what do you tell them?
It might be more interesting to talk about what's not working these days, because we have lots of examples of that, but it seems like we're in this shift. I mean, I think this has been going on for a long time, probably ever since the internet came around, but we're in this shift where in the old days, you could be the quiet executive who just executed, and it seems like the modern executive is being forced into this role, or at least some of them are being forced into this role of being master communicators. They're becoming influencers, and they have to go out and proactively create content. Otherwise, they're going to get stuck in a bad situation, and they haven't built up that personal brand to be able to get the message out that they want to get out. And we still seem to see this with the older generation. And by older, I'm saying older than I am. I'm hitting 50 pretty soon here. But
so anyone over 50 there's
right,
the bar.
Anyone
50
over,
is the bar.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
If you're over 50, it seems like there's this older generation thing where they're saying, no, I can still do things the old way. I can just be quiet. I can execute. I don't have to get out there and speak. And then some disaster happens, some PR nightmare, and all of a sudden they have to go out and speak. And then they're saying these focus grouped, scripted things. They don't know how to communicate naturally and authentically. And you see how it just falls apart and causes a nightmare for them. And it's not just embarrassing. I mean, we're talking about companies losing billions of dollars of market share and stock caps because the executives don't know how to communicate with the public in a normal, natural way. Then you look at these guys who are 20, 30, maybe 40 years old, and they're experts at this, and they can sit down in front of a camera and just talk normally and naturally. They don't have to go ask the legal team for what to say, and they've mastered this art of communication. Alex Hormozi is one of these young guys who's coming up right now, and he has this saying that attention is the new oil, that's really the business of the future is attention. And you see what a master he is at leveraging attention, creating attention, and then leveraging that attention. I think that's the future of what we see for all executives, whether they like it or not, is they're going to have to be good talkers. They're going to have to be good communicators.
Who are some of the role models? You said some of the people in 20s, 30s, even 40s. Like who, aside from Alex, who are role models you'd point to for people to look at?
I'm trying to think of more traditional CEOs who might fall into that. I mean, we know Alex Hormozi and Gary Vaynerchuk. These are kind of these influencer / entrepreneurs who are out there. I don't necessarily like to use them as examples because a lot of people find their style to be a bit brash and off-putting. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But even recently, who's the private equity guy who's kind of Bill Ackman? He's kind of taking Harvard to task lately. He's doing a great job of communicating and getting his message out. And it's very natural, and it's kind of divisive. I mean, the issue is a divisive one right now, but he is doing a great job of speaking directly to his audience, directly to the public. And he's putting out a lot of content over Twitter, or X as we're now supposed to call it. But he seems to have been doing a really good job of that. And he seems to be more of an old school type of guy. He wasn't looking to be an influencer. He's not like a Gary Vaynerchuk, but he seems to be doing a good job communicating.
You use the word forced. Executives are going to be forced to do this. What's that? What does that look like? I mean, it sounds painful.
Well, it's like, several years ago, I mean, this is decades ago, but there was a Qantas airliner that an engine blew up and fell off, and parts of it landed in a school, parts of it landed in a street in the city. And the CEO got a phone call saying, hey, our stock price is diving. What is going on? CEO didn't know what was going on. It had been 10 minutes since this engine fell off this plane. But what had happened is somebody took a photo of this engine with the Qantas logo on it and put it up on Twitter. And so the stock price was diving like a rock because the public knew before the CEO of the company knew. And so he was forced to get out there and start communicating about this emergency because the situation demanded it. Now, if that had been 20 years before, he would have had days to prepare a response. It would have had to go through all the normal channels, through newspapers, it might have been on TV. But with the internet, everything's going out there instantly, and that's the type of thing that's forcing executives to come to grips with being master communicators. It's not just about saying the right stuff, it's about being able to say the right stuff very quickly.
How do you train people to do that? What are the first steps that people take in learning how to better communicate?
I think the only real formula is a lot of practice. It just takes time. It's like going to the gym. You just have to put in the reps. You have to put in the time. There's no real shortcut to get there. It's not like you can run an executive through a training program over 3 months and they come out a master communicator. They'll come out better, but they're not going to be a master communicator. I think because it takes so much time to really develop these skills, I think it's something where the executives of the future are going to be recruited based on pre-existing skill sets they have that lend themselves to this. Then they might get additional training. But I think it's got to start when they're young. It's got to start when they're teens, when they're in their 20s, and then they'll develop those skills so that by the time they're in their 30s and 40s and they're at that transitional age, then they're the right fit. But the guy who's 50 or 60 today who says, I hate being on camera, I don't know how to write, I don't want to be a communicator, I just want to execute, I think this is going to be the last generation we see of those people.
So, people listening today, Josh, they're saying, okay, I want to take this seriously. I am embracing the future. I've been resisting it for a long time and I want to start. On this show, I've talked about, previous guests who you introduced me to, Stacey Havener, that, I remember back in the days in your course when she's like, I'm going to start taking LinkedIn seriously. Do you guys think I should? And you're like, yes, Stacey, yes, you should. And it's like, she just got serious and she put in the repetitions day after day after day after day. And she's shooting just a random video on her iPhone while she's walking on the beach. She lives in Rhode Island and she's writing these personal things with a real opinion that would be hard for somebody. Somebody can't just copy and paste it and make it theirs and then get so much business. Her employees are like, can you stop posting on LinkedIn? We can't handle all these leads. Right. So people are like, oh, I want to be like Stacey, or Ted went, shot up 20,000 followers this year by getting after it. For people who want to do stuff like that, what's your thought?
And she's an outlier, right? She's one of those few people who took it and ran with it and is actually doing it, which is amazing. I see her LinkedIn posts, I see her email newsletters. I'm like, she's actually doing this. This is fantastic.
And now she has a podcast.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the lessons is the vast majority of people simply won't even take the first step, or they'll take the step and they go 3 steps and then they say, oh, this isn't working, and they give up. They quit. Whereas she has just kept on cranking away, going at it over and over and over again. Now, what Stacey also got right is she figured out what her strength was, what her genius zone was, and she knew who her audience was. She knew why she was able to connect with her audience or what had led to success connecting with her audience in the past. And then she went out and she experimented with connecting with them where they're at. She knew that her audience was on LinkedIn. She knew that they listened to podcasts. She knew that they would subscribe to her newsletter. And so she started pumping out content in the right places and experimenting with other places to make those connections. But I think the main takeaway is she just kept doing it. She kept experimenting. She kept trying stuff because it's different for everybody. Everybody has an audience. Everybody has their own zone of genius, their genius zone. But figuring out exactly how to connect to your audience is something that only comes through trial and error.
Do you think, what are your thoughts when people come to you and say, what should I be talking about? Like, how do you react to that? Because I've had people say that to me. Some people have said to me, what's hot right now on LinkedIn that I should write about? And I always say, that's not the right way to think about it. You should write about what you care about. But when people come to you, what do you tell them? They say, what should I be writing?
Well, one of my favorite mentors of all time was Clayton Christensen, and he wrote The Innovator's Dilemma and How Will You Measure Your Life, these great books, and he passed away a few years ago. But one of my favorite lessons from him was he talked about jobs to be done. He said, you don't buy a drill bit because you want a drill bit, you buy a drill bit because you want a hole in something. You're buying the hole. And I love that concept of jobs to be done. So when somebody comes to me and they say, I want to get into PR, or I want to write a book, or I want to be active with my personal brand, my first question is, what is the job that you're trying to get done? Are you trying to recruit people? Are you trying to connect with people and change their behavior? Are you trying to build your business? Like, what are the different jobs to be done that you want to do? And then we start from there and say, okay, well, why are you the person to communicate with your audience? Who is your audience? What do you want that audience to do? And then what is the best content that we can create to connect with your audience, to move them to take the action that you want them to take? And that's the order in which we want to do it.
Just one aside, though, but I had read in your biography, you met Clayton Christensen when you were much younger, I believe, and it was, I think, before the book, before he became famous. If that's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I met him in 1997 when he was just a minor professor at Harvard Business School, but he was the nicest person I've ever met, just a great human being, and I had the opportunity to interview him a few times, and it was one of the highlights of my life.
So people come to you, they say, you say, what's your job that you want to get done? Then you help them define. Walk us through how you would define for someone. If someone says, well, I want more sales or I want more business, and that's their goal, that's their goal. How do you help them understand the content that they should produce?
Sure. Well, so I've alluded to it, but I have this framework called the 7 Systems of Influence, and it's a roadmap or a framework or a method for creating influence and maintaining that influence and then leveraging it. And so the first thing we start with is the vision, which is, what do you want? And so we sit down, we talk about what the person really wants, what their goal is. And for a lot of executives, it's, I want to grow my business, or I want to attract top talent, or it's something along those lines. So we talk about that vision. We try to define that vision clearly. Then we talk about genius zone, which is, what's the combination of background, skills, experience, talent, etc., that gives you an unfair advantage at doing what you want to do. And so the example I often give about myself is, we were talking before the show, I enjoy skateboarding. I've been into skateboarding since I was a little kid. I've worked in the industry. I know people in the industry. And I love skateboarding. And I know quite a bit about it because I've absorbed it for the past 40 years or so. And I've also run a marketing agency for the past 25 years. So I know a lot about skateboarding, but by itself, my knowledge of skateboarding doesn't make me very unique. There are a lot of other people out there that know just as much, if not a lot more, about skateboarding than I do. And there are a lot of people out there who have run marketing agencies, and they know a lot. But how many people out there have 25 years experience running a marketing agency and 40 years experience in the skateboard industry? Maybe 5, if that. There aren't that many people who have that overlap of experience. So that gives me a little bit of an unfair advantage. And I could make that my genius zone and say, hey, I'm going to go to Nike and convince them that I can help them sell a lot of shoes to skateboard kids. And that's a genius zone that I could leverage. We all have diverse backgrounds and experiences and skills, but it's in the overlap of those skills that we really find the niche that we can focus on. So when I'm working with an executive, we go through this exercise of listing out all the things that they have any expertise in. And then we say, what are the overlaps that are most interesting to you or that are going to help you to create your vision or make your vision reality? We figure out what that genius zone is. Then we move on to audience and we talk about their audience and who their ideal audience is. And a lot of people will say, well, my audience is everybody or general consumers in general. And we really try to narrow that down, especially for smaller entrepreneurs that are going after, for example, if you take somebody who has a small consulting firm with 10 employees, they don't need to target everybody. They don't need to target even 1,000 people. If I ask them, how many clients do you need to change your entire business, to quadruple your business? They might say, 20 new clients. Okay, well, let's talk about those 20 clients. Who would you most like to work with? Do you want to work with a client that is in your city, or do you want to have to fly around the world to go meet with your clients? Maybe you do want to fly around, but maybe you'd prefer not to have to travel that much. Do you want clients that have lots of money or clients that don't have any money? Let's really get down to the ideal avatar that we're going after. And it's only after we go through those first three things, the vision, the genius zone, the audience, that then we say, okay, where does your audience hang out and what type of content do they want? If they're on YouTube, we're going to have to put you on YouTube. If they're reading Forbes, then you're going to have to write articles. If they're on LinkedIn, then you're going to have to create social media posts. That's when we get into the content strategy and start talking about what content are we going to create that connects with your audience, that lends itself to your genius zone so that it's easy for you to create that content out of your background and experience, and that moves those people to action so that your vision becomes reality.
I think it seems like, from what I'm hearing, and a lot of people don't understand this, your personality on social, you could be 10 different people. In the end, you've decided to be the skateboarding marketing guy. That's who you become, right? Because you're right about that. You probably have many other aspects to your life and personality, but for purposes of the public persona writing and your business, you kind of narrow it down to something. And that makes sense because the audience can't handle an unlimited amount of different things about you. You need to be something. You need to stand for something, I guess.
Right. And I hate that is reality because I want to be all things to all people.
Right. But
you can't.
No, you can't.
Right.
But I think you can change. I believe that. You
Yes.
could be the skateboard marketing guy now. And in the future, you can be the surfing, banker or something if you want to be that. Assuming you actually are surfing, I think.
Right.
And that's an important, I want you to address that because I think that one of the things about the new social presence is that you actually have to be the thing that you are talking about. You can't be an environmentalist if you're not. You can't write about the environment and pretend to be an environmentalist if you're not. I think you get caught out. But talk to us a little bit about that, how that works.
Well, yeah. When you build a personal brand, it's like building a company brand. And there are three legs on the stool of branding, or however you want to put that. It's time, it's money, and it's, I would say, design if you're designing like a visual brand. But that could be content or anything else. The point is, when you build a brand, given enough money, you can build a successful brand. Given enough time, you can build a successful brand, even if you're lacking in the other two. And given enough design or content or other assets to support that brand, that's going to help you build a successful brand as well. Ideally, you have all three of those. So you look at a Coca-Cola or some brand or Apple or something, they've had a lot of time, they've had a lot of money, and they also have all the surrounding design and content and everything else to build up that brand. It's the same with people, but the problem is once you invest that time, money, and everything else into building that brand, you're kind of stuck with it. If Apple wanted to switch to an entirely different industry, I mean, let's say self-storage or something, it would take decades for them to get rid of the idea that they're a phone company and convince everybody that they're a self-storage company. 15 years ago, I was trying to leave my marketing agency and I wanted to go back into the skateboard industry, and I sent out one email announcing that I was doing this, but then it didn't work out. And so then I stayed with my marketing agency. 15 years ago, to this day, I still get people coming back and saying, hey, I thought you quit your marketing agency. And I'm like, and you went back into the skateboard industry. I'm like, that was one email I sent 15 years ago, and it's still stuck in your mind that I am the guy who left his agency and went back into the skateboarding industry. So it's hard to get rid of whatever brand you establish once it's established. And so that's why it doesn't work to split your brand across 10 different things, even though I'm trying. If you want to have a powerful personal brand, you've got to stick to one thing and be the such and such guy or the such and such gal. And then it's going to stick, and you are kind of stuck with it. And you can try to switch, but it's tough.
So, well, Ted, I'm going to leave it with you. What else do you want to ask Josh?
Well, I want to know, let's say I'm an executive and I come to you now, and like you walked us, this was really effective. I saw it. You walk through what's your vision, what's your genius zone, what's your audience, and all those things. How do you elicit from them? Do you have a process for who they want to be or what they want to, like, how do you narrow it down for them? Do you have to help them often with that? Is that a difficult process, or are people pretty clear? Because it seems to me one of the problems with the generational gap, the older executives, is they kind of want to be all things to everybody. That seems to be, and I think if you take the difference between like a Sam Altman or somebody under 40, they're kind of much more willing to say, here's who I am and this is what I believe or this is what I do. Everyone over 50 or 60 is much more inclined to not risk making anyone upset for any reason or like disagree with them for any reason. So they're hesitant to put themselves out there in a way. How do you get them over that?
It is an interesting generational gap there, and I see that with executives, but I mean, it's also just, I see this with my parents. My parents see how much I put myself out there on social media and what I share in emails, and I'll sit down with my dad at Christmas time and he'll be like, I think you're sharing a little bit too much. You're getting a little bit too personal. There's just a generational thing there. In the old days, we just didn't talk that much about our feelings and what we're going through in the day to day. And yet that's kind of expected these days, to be more open and vulnerable. And I think what we've realized, maybe consciously, or maybe it's just because it works, is that vulnerability is where trust comes from. And people do business with brands and people that they trust, that they know, like, and trust, right? And when we get vulnerable, people feel like, well, gee, I can actually trust this person and I can believe what they say. And if I believe what they say, then I'm going to want to buy the stuff that they're selling. Now, tying that back into how do you get somebody to get to that point of vulnerability? Part of it is just teaching them that this is how you're going to build trust, and this is why people buy your stuff, is because they trust you, and you're going to have to get vulnerable. It doesn't mean you have to reveal all your secrets, but it means that you have to be a little bit more open about how you feel, and you have to take some risks. And sometimes those risks are going to blow up in your face. There are times when you take a risk, you say something, and the result is you get absolutely crushed in the media because you said something the wrong way. However, you can say something the right way and get crushed in the media. I mean, we were talking about Harvard University. I mean, these 3 university presidents who went in front of Congress the other day, they all followed the scripted line. They said the exact same thing. It was the safe thing that they had been trained and prepped to say, and it blew up in their face. Even with all of that money and research behind them, it was absolutely the wrong thing at the wrong time to say in that environment. So no matter what, the risk is there. But at least when you say what you believe and what you really think, you're going to be coming from what's true to yourself, what you really believe. And people are going to say, hey, I might not like what they're saying, but the fact that they're saying what they really believe, that alone is refreshing. And people are willing to take a second look at you and consider your message more if they know it's coming from a place of vulnerability and truth about who you really are and what you really believe. When they sense it's scripted, which is so easy these days to pick out, and I think this is something the younger generation is so attuned to and so good at, of detecting when somebody's saying something scripted, it's almost a lose-lose situation. You can even say the right thing when it's scripted, but if they detect that it's scripted, then they don't believe it.
Yeah. Talk to us about LinkedIn. You wrote a book about it and emphasized the platform. Tell us how it compares with other platforms right now, why you think it's working so well, and how you approach it.
I love all forms of social media. I think they're all fun. I think they all have their place. I think it's a grand social experiment with all sorts of mess and terrible stuff, but also great stuff. But I love LinkedIn because it's the only professional social platform, right? I mean, it's not TikTok, it's not Facebook, it's not Twitter, it's none of those things. It's you see some of that stuff seeping into LinkedIn a little bit, but still, it's by and large, it's a professional platform where you can talk about largely professional things. You rarely see people talking about politics on LinkedIn. Nobody's posting the stuff you see on TikTok on LinkedIn. It seems like it's a very different fare, and I love that because it's kind of my safe space. It's the place where I can go and I can just talk about professional stuff, and I don't need to worry about getting dragged into some political debate or something. And it's where people are actually doing business. I mean, they're doing business everywhere, right? There are people making a lot of money on every platform, but LinkedIn is the place where normal people can go and conduct business and get stuff done. I mean, I can go on LinkedIn and I can post about book publishing or PR or marketing or something, and people will reach out to me and say, hey, my company's going through this stage right now and we could use some help with that. Can we talk with you? If I tried to get that done on Twitter or Facebook or TikTok, it would be a much harder journey for me to get that, but I can do that with a single post on LinkedIn and I can get results.
How much do you think it's due to the fact that by and large, LinkedIn is our real names and they're real people and identity versus Twitter, which has, many people use their real name, but many people don't?
I think it's partly that, but I think it's mostly just that people go to LinkedIn for a reason and they go to TikTok for a different reason. And it's people are showing up on LinkedIn to get work done, to get business done, to learn, to develop themselves professionally. And so it's a different purpose.
This is.
So I'm going to jump in here because I've been trying to convert Ted to embrace the world of podcasting. And if anybody doesn't know, Josh got a great podcast, published author podcast, interviews like heroes of mine like Chris Voss, FBI hostage negotiator, and so many great authors. Josh, if you had to make a pitch to Ted about the value of podcasts, where are you at?
I'm so bullish on podcasts still. I feel like podcasts are still just scratching the surface. It's funny because we went through this podcast phase way back in the day. I mean, like 10, 15 years ago. And then it like faded away and now it's come back. And now you already see people like, oh yeah, podcasts are dead again. But I still think it's a very hot commodity that I still think we're in like the Atari days of podcasts. And I think over the next 10, 20 years, we're going to see podcasts be a large replacement for TV, for radio, for the things that we grew up listening to. I think podcasts are going to replace that. I think we're going to see podcasts replace a lot of audiobooks as well. I think instead of, and I mean, I'm a book guy. I love books. I love writing books. I love listening to books, reading books. But books take a lot of work and it's very refined content that you really have to polish up. And the problem is it takes a long time to do that, to create a book that's polished and refined. Whereas with a podcast, I mean, I can just start today. I can start talking today, and then people don't assume that it's so refined and polished. And I think that ability to quickly connect with your audience in a more authentic, less scripted way, and just have a conversation, I think that is taking over, and we're seeing it with Joe Rogan. I mean, here's a guy who's just a guy who talks to interesting people for 3 or 4 hours, and yet he's the most popular podcaster in the world. There's something that he's tapping into there, right? And I think we're going to see more and more of that. We're going to see the Joe Rogan of every industry, the Joe Rogan of every topic. I mean, we are seeing it, but we're just going to see more and more of that, and it's going to get more and more refined. I still feel like podcasting is very messy early days, and it's just going to get better. Probably.
I wonder how much do you think that's due? We've had this like quantum leap where a few years ago podcasts were all audio, and then all of a sudden they're all video. You know?
Yeah, YouTube's the largest podcast.
That's right. They're all video now, and that is. I'm curious about your thoughts about how that's different, how it changes it. Because I agree with you. I think that I like the way you put it. It's going to replace a lot of TV we watch. It's just better learning. You know, if there's somebody I want to meet, I'm going to do business with, I'm interested in, I just watch like 5 podcasts he's been on, and boom, I have a really amazing feeling for that person. And that wasn't possible like 5 years ago. Well, most of them, to the degree they even did podcasts, they weren't video, and there weren't so many. And I really think it's an incredible repository of information. But I think the video aspect is underappreciated, and I have friends who don't even understand that podcasts are mostly video now.
Yeah,
you know, if you're not a podcast person, you know.
I think it's interesting that Google Podcasts, or Google, is getting rid of their podcast app and forcing everybody to go use Google YouTube for their to get their podcasts. I think that's a sign of the direction that Google is putting into this, and it blurs what you're saying. It's not really a podcast anymore. It's a channel. It's a YouTube channel, or it's a video production. Really,
well, look at the way YouTube this year. I mean, go to a YouTube channel. There's new tabs across the top. There's videos, there's shorts, there's playlists, and now there's podcasts, and it's its own tab on a YouTube channel that, you know, interestingly coincided with this year when YouTube passed Apple and Spotify as the #1 podcast platform on earth.
And YouTube Music, I mean, a lot of people, if you say online music, the first brand you think of today is Spotify. They've owned this space for a while. And of course, they picked it up from Apple iTunes back in the day. But as far as online streaming music, Spotify's always owned that. But I got roped into using YouTube Music because I use Google Fi for my cell phone service, and they gave out a free YouTube Premium membership, which comes with YouTube Music. So I started setting up my playlists on YouTube Music and everything. I like it better than Spotify. I think it's more user-friendly. They've got just as large of a catalog of everything. Now they're forcing me to transfer all my podcasts from Google Podcast into YouTube Music, and then we'll probably see YouTube Music just get folded over into the general YouTube. But they're bringing that all together, which I think is representative of what's going on in society, which is we just want one easy place to find everything that we want, whether it's entertainment or learning.
Yeah.
And YouTube is ideally suited for that because it's got it all. You can listen to audio, you can watch video. I mean, the one thing they don't have is like print content, readable content per se, although you could put that out there, but it's not designed for that. But they've really got, I think, a lock on the future, and I think Spotify is going to get a run for its money.
And you see it going beyond the individuals. You know, I remember Ed Samara Cohen on the show, you know, she manages $6 trillion at BlackRock, and she's got her own interview series. Like if you go to BlackRock's iShares YouTube channel, right? And she's like, she gets the CFO of McLaren supercars on there and stuff, and like has these like great meaningful conversations. And like, you know, in the early 2000s when I was at M&A at Citi, there was no senior executives anywhere doing anything a mile away from something like that. Ted, do you see it differently?
No, there's a lot of it going on. What I wanted to ask Josh about was there's a lot, and Goldman does a lot of it. Other firms do it. Obviously, you know, Apple does a ton of this too. They basically do their they bring in people and they do talks. Google does these talks. They film them and put them on YouTube and whatever. I guess what I was going to wonder about that is not everybody does it great. Not everybody's great at that. So I wondered about your thoughts about that. I think generally it's absolutely happening.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this goes back to Josh, what you were saying about how people who are going to get opportunities have certain skills. In a way, they have media skills. That's going to be a new thing because I think that's kind of it. It's like everybody's jumping into doing these videos and interviews and stuff. Some people are not great at it. Some people are better. I think in the future, that'll be a core competency, a core skill, like public speaking, maybe like public writing. I think that's very interesting.
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
So in the old days, if you were a bad writer, you'd go hire a ghostwriter and they would make you look good,
That's
right? But there was
That's
nothing
right.
like that for audio or video. It's like you had to show up and you had to have at least a certain baseline to be able to do that. But now with AI, it's making this more attainable. I mean, we've got this deep fake stuff coming out, but I mean, it's getting to the point that you can already do the audio. You can already train AI to learn your voice, and then you can give it a written document and it will read it in your voice with your tone, with your inflections. So how far are we away from the point where you can go record yourself for an hour or two to train AI and then say, go release a series of 100 podcasts with me talking on video and audio and make people believe that it's me talking and you actually have nothing to do with the creation. It's just, I mean, if we're not already there, we're like 6 to 12 months away from this. And it's one thing for an executive. I mean, they can hire a team, but what about the individual who can now go do this? It puts them on the same level as somebody who has access to a fancy studio and everything. That's going to be really interesting.
But the problem with that is just like when everybody, earlier this year or last year, when everybody started having ChatGPT write their social media posts and then no one liked it. You're like the inputs still matter so much, right?
Yeah. But it's still such early stage. I mean, it's just a matter of time before this stuff gets a lot better. We're still I mean, we're playing around with like 1950s IBM computers here, and it's where are we going to be in 10, 20, 30 years? It's going to be amazing, and it's going to be great because there are people out there with great ideas, but they're a quote-unquote nobody, right? They don't have the credibility of having run a BlackRock or some huge corporation or something. They haven't built this personal brand, but they've got the great ideas. And even just 2 years ago when I was starting my podcast, it was $400, $500 for me to produce a show because I had to pay somebody to do the show notes. I had to get the video edited, the audio edited, uploaded, everything. And now you've got like Descript, which I can record directly into Squadcast. It goes into Descript. It automatically removes all my ums and uhs and cops or whatever. It edits both the video and audio for me. It creates a transcript. I mean, we're rapidly getting to the point where it's going to cost me $4 to produce a podcast episode instead of $400 in just a matter of years. And then you take that 10 years into the future, like how easy is it going to be to create great content, even for people who have no communication skills? Other than that, they have good ideas.
Yeah, I would push back on that a little bit. And I would bring up the classic Milli Vanilli case and I think the difference here is that, professional musicians, when they produce albums, they're heavily produced. But it's at the end of the day, they still have to get on the stage, and Springsteen has to sing, and YouTube has to sing, and they're not going to be the same as in the studio, but they can't be Milli Vanilli. They can't not sing at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the analogy here is with executives and so forth. You can get help speech writing, you can get help giving speeches, you can post-produce some of the stuff. But at the end of the day, at some point, they're going to have to get on a stage somewhere. And if their personal brand is completely different than their produced brand, like unrecognizably so, it'll be a problem. Well, I think that's where you get into the thing. So I do think people will get better and better at these things. And yes, they're going to produce them. They'll take out the ums and the ahs. We already do that. Well, but you still will meet these people in real life, and it will go badly if they're complete frauds. So I believe that. I believe that.
But I want to jump in this because I agree with you, Ted. And, so Josh, I'm thinking about a couple of your clients that I know who are worth hundreds of millions of dollars personally. And I know they have these long conversations with you. I'm interested in how you thread this needle of like, they're busy and they're looking for help on certain things and their voice needs to still show up. Like these people who have won at capitalism, you're, you know, what is that conversation like when you're helping them decide what parts they can outsource, what parts they need to do?
It's kind of what I just described, except it's a manual process instead of AI generated. But it's, hey, we're gonna sit down, we're gonna talk with you, we're gonna grab your ideas, and then we are going to write content that's in your voice, in your tone. We can't create video yet for them. I mean, maybe we could if we wanted to go that route, but we're not going that route yet. We're not going to create audio for them, like AI produced audio yet, but we can do the writing side of that. And we use a human process to do it, not AI. But we're essentially doing the same thing. We're just doing it manually instead of using AI to do it. And for a lot of executives, they're very uncomfortable with this starting out. I mean, just bringing up the word ghostwriter, a lot of executives say, well, no. If I'm going to do this, it has to be exactly my words and everything. And what we point out to them is, you're great at being an executive. You have great ideas. You have great knowledge. It's still going to be your knowledge, your ideas. It's going to be what you say, but we are expert writers. We're expert book writers. We are expert PR people. We are experts at creating articles and content. You're not an expert writer. We are. Let us take your ideas and write it the way that you would write it if you were an expert writer. And we generally have to trial that a little bit with them, but once we try it out and they see the content and they see, our goal is for them to sit down and read our content and say, wow, that is exactly what I would have written. That sounds just like me. And then they trust us to start really churning the content out. That takes some work. That takes some listening and trial and error and producing content and then getting feedback before we get it right. But that's how we get the executives comfortable with it, is doing a little trial and error. And then also when we tell them that everybody else is doing this and all their competitors are doing the same thing, then they tend to jump on board fast. I mean, 90% of the New York Times bestseller list is ghost-written books.
What's the difference in your mind between book writing right now, LinkedIn writing, other forms of writing for Forbes, or in terms of effectiveness or, strategy? Like when people come to you, what do you recommend and why?
I always recommend a book. And I love that, Jeff Bezos said instead of asking what's going to change over the next 10 years, he likes to ask what's not going to change.
Yeah.
And I love that books have really not changed in hundreds of years. I mean, if you look at a book from 500 years ago, it's some thicker paper, cardboard stuff with thinner pages in the middle, and there's writing on those pages, and we look at those squiggly lines, and we have hallucinations, and that's what a book does, right? And I love that that's still basically what a book is today. I mean, we might listen to it, we might read it on Kindle or something, but essentially books are kind of the same thing that they were hundreds of years ago, which to me tells me they're probably going to be the same 10 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now. I don't know that they're really going to get replaced, because I think people will still sit down with a physical book and they're going to enjoy that experience of reading. And I feel like part of what draws us to reading is it is a lot of work to produce a book. And so we know when we sit down with a book that somebody spent a lot of time refining their ideas and figuring out how to communicate this in just the right way. Now, there's a lot of junk out there too, but by and large, when we read books or we read popular books, these are very well-written books that a lot of thought went into.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you can see my shelves behind me. They're full of books. I buy way too many books. I listen to too many books, but I love doing it. And there's always going to be a certain crowd that's always going to want to do that. And there's nothing like a book in terms of authority because of that work that goes into it. And so if somebody's saying, hey, how should I build my personal brand? I always say, if you can stomach it, if you can get through it, write a book, because it's going to have that credibility and authority that nothing else will. I've done public speaking and I get paid to speak. And when I published my first book in 2015, all of a sudden I could charge 3 times as much to go out and give a 45-minute lecture because I had a book. Even if what I was talking about didn't have anything to do with my book, just the fact that I had a book allowed me to charge a lot more. People listen to people who have written a book because even though there are millions of books published every year, most of us are not writing books, and most of us look at a book and say, oh, I could never do that. That's too hard. That's too much work. You wouldn't know where to start. And so we unfairly or fairly put people on a pedestal who have written a book. Well,
yeah, it's a little bit of credentialing. It's you went to Harvard. Not that many people go to Harvard. You had to get in, so forth.
Yep. And it's a lot cheaper to write a book than go to Harvard.
It is a lot cheaper. What's the latest book you bought or ordered? Do you remember?
Yes, because I bought it like an hour ago. But yeah, the last one I bought was actually a book on burnout. It's not for myself, but I have a team member who's going through some challenges with burnout. And so I have a book coaching client who's a professor at UCLA, and she's writing a book about burnout. And I said, is this more for people who are burned out or employers of people who are burned out? And she said, my book's more for the individual, but if you're an employer with somebody who's burned out, here's the book to read. And so there's a book, I can't remember the name of it now, but it's, here it is, Beating Burnout at Work by Paula Davis. So that's my next book that I'm going to read.
What about you, Ted? What's your next book?
Well, I don't know what my next book is. The last book I bought was the Brian Grazer book, A Curious Mind, because you recommended it to me, Jess. You told me it. I'm going to tell you the book. I honestly, I don't know if you know this concept, Josh, but Brian Grazer, the Hollywood producer, at some point, people realized, or he spilled the beans, that he's been doing this thing for 30 years, where every week he finds somebody to interview and kind of do a deep dive in an area that is not his area of expertise. So I don't know, like all kinds of industries, all kinds of people. And I just was absolutely enchanted by the idea of the mindful idea of like going out and finding somebody who's outside your arena and sitting with them and learning from them. It was great.
Okay, if you like that one,
I love the idea. I don't know if I love the book as much. I'll tell you why. Because I think it actually works better. He ends up by the end of the 30 years interviewing a lot of celebrities and famous people. And I'm going to be honest, I think they don't work as well as the people who are like true. I don't know. They're just not as well known. It's just more interesting. But Jess is going to give us a book, I'm sure, here.
Yes, Jess always has book recommendations.
Yes,
I do like my books. Okay, I'll tell you. One of the ones I just finished was Fans First by Jesse Cole, the guy that started the Savannah Bananas. And I can tell you, I don't know if there's anybody more committed to making sure their customers have a good time since Walt Disney. I mean, like, he is like generationally a winner. Like, he is on another level. And I just think that I will for sure listen to that book multiple times again.
I've heard about him, but I didn't know about the book, so I'm going to pick that one up.
Yeah. So I want to go back, though, Josh. You've got these clients that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars personally, and they're trying to make decisions about what to do and not to do. Give us an example of something that you help them with there.
Well, for example, I have a client who, I have to be careful what I say here, because a lot of his story is confidential and sensitive, but he was involved in the COVID response, and at the center of, he worked with 73 countries on their COVID response in pretty in-depth ways, and his business that he started during COVID and grew to $5 billion in revenue kind of blew up. Well, it did blow up. And so now he's got this book that he's working on that talks about this amazing journey creating this $5 billion company, 9,000 employees within a 2-year period from scratch. And then the implosion of that company. And there are really two stories. You've got one book, which is this amazing entrepreneurial story. And then you have this other side, which is this scandal that took down this company and blew everything up. And so it's kind of, if you read Bad Blood about Elizabeth Holmes and all of that, he's kind of got that book, but then he's also got this just great business storybook. And so one of his questions has been, do I write this in 2 books? Do I combine this all into 1 book? How much do I talk about what's going on? I'm still in the middle of lawsuits. There's a bunch of crazy stuff going on in my life because of this still. Like, the story's not done. So what do I share? And yet at the same time, he feels like I need to get ahead of this and share this because one of his business enemies is making a feature film and painting him to be the bad guy in this movie. So he's like, I got to get my book out there to protect myself. So this was one of the questions that we had to work through is, what do we put into this first book? Do we split out the second book? How do we work on this? And I'm not sure. I mean, we've answered this question 20 times over, and we've gone back and forth between, oh, let's do all 1 book. No, let's do 2 books. Let's keep a lot of the sensitive information out of the book. No, let's put all of it in because it's so interesting and it matters to the story and people are going to find it so fascinating. But it's really situational to say, what do we want to share? I always try to push people to err on the side of sharing more rather than less because it goes back to the vulnerability and the trust. But there are specific circumstances in his case where it's like, well, I mean, if this could get you into not just legal trouble, but like physical danger, maybe we want to hold off on this. So there are specific circumstances for him that are making it a harder question to answer.
Well, that's a interesting, balance beam to have to get down. I know we're running out of time. Let's start with, websites for some of your 6 businesses, and is LinkedIn the best place to contact with you and some of those things?
LinkedIn is really the best place to connect with me because just as we talked about not splitting your personal brand amongst 10 different things, my life and my purpose as an entrepreneur is I want to launch lots of businesses. And so I've got my LinkedIn agency, my marketing agency, my PR firm, my book coaching business. I've got all these different things going on. And the easiest place that they're all tied together is on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Well, Ted, what do you want for a final question here?
Okay, so somebody's never been on LinkedIn. They're 50 years old. They run a company. What's the first thing you tell them?
Just get on and start playing around. I mean, put your name in, put your title in, but, or actually, I guess, buy my book and just follow my book, and that will teach you. But it's, there are people who are not, so this client I was just talking about who has this crazy COVID business story, he wasn't even on LinkedIn until a year ago. And that's when his wife forced him to get on because she said, you better get on because you're going to have to tell your story and protect yourself.
Yeah.
But I mean, he built a $5 billion business with never having been on LinkedIn. It's not like LinkedIn is necessary to be successful in life. It's just, it's a helpful tool. And if it fits somebody, it fits. If an executive came to me and said, do I need to be on LinkedIn? I'd say, well, maybe, maybe not. I mean, let's go through those systems of influence and figure out if this is how you reach your audience or not. If your audience is on LinkedIn and that's a place that you can double your business, well, do you want to be there or do you not want to be there? So if you want to manage the narrative about your business, if you want to be able to handle crisis PR in a more timely manner, is that a good place for you to be to handle those things? If the answer is yes, then let's get you on there and let's set up your profile. But it starts with setting up your profile, then you get it optimized, then you connect with people, then you start pumping out content. It's those 3 things: profile, setup or optimization, connecting with lots of people, and pumping out high quality content on a consistent basis.
Makes sense. Great. Well, thank you for joining us. This has been great.
Thank you, guys.
I learned a lot.
It's so fun to chat.
I feel like we could have easily gone for 3 more hours, but we'll call it quits for here. Thanks everybody for listening.